Does stop and search work?
And as she continues to battle stage 4 lung cancer, I've been speaking to Esther Rantzen about her own mortality.
Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Kamal Ahmed.
And me, Camilla Tominey. Now, Kamal, I know people listening can't see what you're wearing, but you are the master of the turtleneck, and I note that you're not in your normal attire today, that you're actually in a beautiful suit and tie. Where are you going?
Well, I have eschewed my turtleneck today for a suit and tie because, and there's no, frankly, way to say this without sounding like a grotesque humble brag, so I'm just going to go for it. I am going to tea at Buckingham Palace straight after this wonderful recording.
Where was my invitation? To be fair, I have been to tea at Buckingham Palace
What's
before.
it loud? Camilla, you can give me advice.
Well, it's fun. And you will get up close and personal with members of the royal family. Do you know how to address the King and Queen, should you see them?
Your Majesty.
Yes. So Your Majesty, the King and Queen, but you say Your Royal Highness to less senior royals. And then what will happen is you'll have to stand on ceremony, listen to the national anthem as they arrive at the garden party. And then you've got to kind of manoeuvre yourself around, be slightly sharp-elbowed to try and be in the sort of welcoming line to get up close and personal with members.
He won't be looking for me?
Well, might he be looking for you? Because they obviously listen to the Daily Tea. That much we know. And if they don't, they should. Let's conclude that. And also, you'll be taller than a lot of the people there. So you might shine out like a beacon to them.
So the King is inviting not only me, but 4,000 of his closest friends, which is obviously going to be quite an intimate affair. I don't know I'll actually have tea with the King, but that's how I'm describing it.
You can describe it like that. And by the way, they put on a great picnic lunch.
And it says that on the invite, tea with the King, so that'll do for me.
Can we, just because we're talking about royalty, it isn't invite, it's invitation.
So sorry.
Invite is a verb, invitation is a noun.
You see, I'm showing my sort of, my lowly roots.
But you're excited about it. Is it the first time you've been to a garden party?
It isn't, actually. I have been to 2 before, actually.
I've only been to 1. How have you got invited to 2? I've been covering this family for decades.
I'm so close to the royals. They're always asking me over. I think I should say a little bit. Shouldn't I say a little bit about why?
No, no one cares.
No
one cares about your creative bloody industry.
No. I think we just say a little point about.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, the reason behind it is actually relatively serious. They are bringing together lots and lots of people from the creative industries. And it's a celebration of how good Britain is across.
I love your spin that you're putting on it. My spin is that they're trying to get the Republicans on side, who all work in the arts, that they're basically trying to ingratiate themselves with the champagne socialists of London.
I've not been quizzed on any of those issues. We get to them in later podcasts. But if I could just finish my point, Camilla, it's to bring together the creative industries because they are a very important part of the British economy, not just for the UK, but also for abroad. And I suppose, Camilla, in the end, URNFI.
Can you hear giggling in the gallery in response to that?
Yes. Today, it's been a big debate about stop and search, the police, knife crime, what's the best way to tackle it? Chris Philp, the Policing Minister, he has written a piece for the Telegraph saying that we need zero tolerance in our approach to knife crime. He writes particularly about stop and search. Let me just read out a little bit of that article, which you can see on telegraph.co.uk. He says, the police must use the powers available to them without fear or favour. I want to see them take a robust approach, and this starts with increasing the use of stop and search. It is a vital tool in taking knives off our streets, yet it's not used nearly often enough. Pretty big signal there from the government.
And it seems to be supported by the Metropolitan Police. So the Commissioner, Mark Rowley, he said previously when he did a phone-in with LBC that he thought that stop and search did work. He said that the numbers had been falling over the last 2 or 3 years, some of that down to officer confidence. He added that his officers fear complaints and the investigation they get and whether they feel supported behind it. He also said, he didn't give details, but he said that there was a plan to increase stop and search and that he would be making announcements on that in the coming weeks. Shaun Bailey joins us in the studio now. Lovely to see. Should it be Lord Bailey of Paddington that we now refer to you?
Technically that's correct, but my mum still calls me Shaun, so let's all go with Shaun.
We'll go with Shaun. And just to remind people listening to this, Shaun, you used to be a youth worker. You then got involved in politics. You've been a member of the London Assembly since, I think, 2016.
That's correct.
And you did run to become London Mayor. Unfortunately,
that is also correct.
Didn't get it. And you went into the House of Lords, was it last year?
Yes, in July.
And you've written a piece for us, for the Telegraph website and for the paper, on stop and search. What do you think of what Chris Philp and indeed Mark Rowley has said?
Look, what I'm saying about stop and search is pretty simple. It is no coincidence that when Sadiq Khan became mayor, and he became mayor on the back of saying he'd reduce stop and search, right? He's very clear about that. Within his first mayoralty and into his second, we had 2 record years for teenage knife deaths. If you then look at crime, particularly knife crime, in the context of London over since 2016 when he became mayor up till now, we've had record levels, and that's because stop and search has been attacked as a policing tactic. Let's be very clear, it hasn't always been done well. People from my community, the black community, have had real serious grievances with it. But I was speaking to a mother who had her son murdered. This was some years ago now, and she said to me, I wish someone had stopped the kid who had stabbed my child. And I said, why? And she said, because that child has effectively murdered 2 children. She was referring to the fact he was now going to get very serious prison sentence, and also his mother was almost in the same pain that she was in. And she was one of the first people to really vocalise for me that stop and search is not the be-all and end-all of police tactics, but it's a very, very, very important one.
Now, Shaun, you were youth and crime advisor to Lord Cameron, when he was Prime Minister. What I'm interested in is the data here. Obviously, there is a lot of public support for stop and search. I think 85% of people in London support stop and search, and its greater use. So there's public support. But the data suggests that actually there's very little evidence that it works, that increasing stop and search doesn't actually lead to a decline in knife crime or murders. I was just looking up this morning, the House of Commons report in 2022 said, direct quote, little evidence of its effectiveness. Work done across the London boroughs, Enfield, Camden and Hillingdon. So Enfield and Camden both really upped the numbers of stops and searches. The actual levels of knife crime rose. Hillingdon, just for comparison, fewer stops and searches, and knife crime fell. So there may be a correlation, but there's no causation. I just wondered, Shaun, when you look at the data, it is popular with the public, but does it actually work?
Let's be very clear. The boroughs that you've compared, Hillingdon and Camden, 2 completely different places for community activity, the shape, colour, size of those communities, and the kind of things that those communities are experiencing. Camden, much closer to the centre of town, a very different goings on. But here's the key thing about the data. What we do know from the data, when they reduced stop and search, we had 2 record years for knife deaths amongst teenagers, primarily black teenagers. Let's do some qualitative research here. When you speak to young people, a few use the fact that everybody else carries a knife as an excuse. Many more genuinely feel unsafe because they believe everybody carries a knife. And when you ask them why, they say because nobody's ever gets stopped and searched. So they believe they can carry a knife. Where do you think the rise of zombie knives came from? So if you go back 15, 20 years, a knife was something you tried to conceal. A zombie knife is almost impossible to conceal if someone taps your pocket, but because you're not going to get stopped and searched, you get into zombie knives. Now, to be clear, with zombie knives, I do believe that the police made that situation worse by advertising the horrible weapons they were seizing. It then made young people think, well, everybody else has got a zombie knife, I better get one. But it still goes back to the core piece. Stop and search is a useful tactic, particularly for young people, because it lets them know that the police are looking at them.
Kamal, I know there's concerns, and they were expressed by former Home Secretary, former Prime Minister Theresa May, about the disproportionate use of stop and search when it came particularly to black people. The stats on this do suggest that even now, I think at the time that Theresa May said it, black people were 7 times as likely than white people to be stopped and searched. That figure now, according to the latest government figures, is 5 times more likely. However, the other statistic is that black men are 9 times more likely to be murdered and 5 times more likely to end up in hospital. So if you're saying that increased stop and search stops black men from being overrepresented in the actual murder and serious injury statistics, you could argue it's a good thing.
Well, as I say, the evidence suggests that it's not as effective as it can initially appear. The government is clearly trying to show it's going to be tough on crime. If you look at the data about where the public is on this issue, they now trust Keir Starmer more than they trust Rishi Sunak on the issue, the broad issue of law and order. It's just another of these subjects where you can feel that the government is leaning into areas where it used to be so well ahead. The Conservatives were always the party of law and order. And in this position that they find themselves now, Rishi Sunak is now, as when you're asked the question, who is the most trusted, is actually behind Keir Starmer. So I can see politically why they do it. I'm just discussing and looking at the evidence of how effective is it. I think you're right, Shaun. The issue on how it's done is really important for, as a mixed black man from London, just like you are saying as a black person from London, Shaun, it has led to big clashes.
Can I ask you both on that? Have you both been stopped and searched a lot? I mean, Shaun, first of all.
Obviously, I was a youth worker. I was what they call a detached youth worker, so I literally used to walk up and down the road. So I have been stopped and searched so many times that my local police used to try to tell the other ones to stop and searching me as a youth worker. But it doesn't. But I just want to go back to this point about the statistics.
Before you do that, Shaun, let's just ask Kamal.
I've been stopped for the crime of being guilty whilst driving a BMW. Yes, I have. And that is the experience. Now, obviously, we're going back quite a bit, Camilla. I think what we have had, and I spoke to a very senior police official this morning, it has changed, though. The environment has changed. We're not in the environment of the 70s and 80s in London when I was growing up, when black people were routinely, as part of police action, stopped and asked to account for what they were doing. So I've never searched, but I was regularly stopped. But we have moved on from that. And this police official I spoke to said that it is the manner of how you do it. And it's as simple as not going in all with aggression, saying you could actually simply say to somebody, have you got a second, please? You know, you can do it in a way that means that the tensions are not increased.
Look, the first thing is stop and search. Its effectiveness doesn't always manifest itself in figures, because what it does, it shows people that actually you could be caught before you did something crazy. So maybe I should leave the knife at home. It shows people that somebody's trying to get these weapons off the streets, so I, as a young person, don't need to arm myself on the streets. That's where the effectiveness of stop and search doesn't appear in the figures, as it were. And as for how you stop and search people, it's no doubt that the police have gotten significantly better, because let's be clear, it was very, very bad in the beginning. It would have been hard not to improve. But there's a key difference here. Black people, particularly young black people, are under pressure. I still do youth work. I still mentor people. I have so many young people who I work with who are terrified to leave the house.
Yeah.
And the trauma from the amount of knife death in the black community and injury as well is massive. So anything that can intervene in that process, I think, is very useful.
I spoke to a former Met Police officer who has stopped and searched a great many people in his career. And his argument was, obviously there's a good way of doing it, but he didn't mind the idea of, particularly when it came to troublemaking criminals of any ethnic background, feeling worried when the police were going around looking as if they were stopping and searching people. We're talking about knife crime here, but obviously they're also looking for drugs and they're looking for stolen goods. So he said back in the day, when it used to be the terminology was to get hands in pockets of criminals, that people used to refer to the vans coming around as bully vans. His point, I think, was a good one. This is him, a direct quote, and he said, we need to decide whether we want young men to be peed off with the police or in body bags. So he's saying there's a lot of scrutiny of the methods here. Contrary to your point, Shaun, you're saying that they're doing it better. He thinks that the police, because of this decrease in stop and search, so 1.2 million stop and searches in 2010 to 11, now down to just over 275,000 in 2017 to 18, he thinks that the police have actually lost the art of stop and search and that they aren't confident doing it, perhaps for some of the points that Rowley mentioned, that they're worried about being overly scrutinised.
There's no doubt, but let's be clear, there's a loss of the kind of skill that he's talking about, but I bet you're talking about a police officer who joined the police force. And if you join today, you join the police service, and it's a very different service. It's doing a different thing. And you can stop as many black people as you like and get support as long as they feel like they're not being over-policed and targeted, as long as they're not being guilty of the crime of being black in public. Because let's be clear, if you go to a black community and you've had lots of violence and knife crime and you stop and search, it can be a positive interaction because, again, you could be stopped. You don't have to be searched. And if police officers are saying things like, look, we want to talk to you about the safety of your community, make sure that you don't have anything on you, blah, 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 these things actually go over really well. And that's the move from police force to police service. But the problem is, when Mark Rowley was right, the police have been overly scrutinised on it. Every move they've performed, they've been looked at as racist, so they've backed right off. And that's the void that's been filled by criminality.
Shaun Bailey, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure.
And your piece is going to be on the Telegraph website.
It will
today and probably in the paper tomorrow.
Esther Rantzen has sparked a very important discussion about assisted dying at end of life. She's asked for significant changes in the law, and it's a subject that has really sparked debate amongst Telegraph readers and amongst our audience. And Camilla, you've caught up with Esther and talked about her journey and also things that have happened over the last 24 hours.
Well, Esther, as you know, Kamal has been a lifelong campaigner, a journalist that certainly inspired women like me into the industry. I remember watching That's Life with a great degree of envy, actually. When I grew up, I wanted to be Esther Rantzen. And so she's brought this debate to life because of her own personal experiences. She's been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. She's been campaigning for assisted dying, and I think we can agree, can't we, that campaign has been fast gaining momentum. It's something that we didn't really used to talk about years ago. It was basically left to doctors.
And it was called assisted suicide, which made it sound much more negative.
And it was something that wasn't really spoken about. Doctors, I think, would put people out of their misery, and we just all kept quiet. There's, of course, this debate in this country about whether we're actually treating humans with more cruelty than we do our own pets. And at the moment, the situation across the UK is assisted suicide is a criminal offence, and if you are involved in assisting somebody to end their own life, you could be jailed for up to 14 years. Scotland's introduced a bill to suggest that actually there should be no criminality for people who are helping others to end their lives if they are terminally ill. And now there's a campaign to introduce that law across England, Wales and Northern Ireland as well. To be fair, it has got a lot of public sympathy. So actually our readership aligns entirely with a YouGov poll which recently revealed that 73% of the British public are in favour of assisted suicide or assisted dying, but only in cases of terminal illness. And I think our readership, it was 75%. So 3/4 of the public seem to be in favour of this.
So the issue is back as a public debate. Liz Carr, the actor who is disabled, uses a wheelchair, has done this very powerful documentary, Better Off Dead, for BBC One. And in it, she raises some very different aspects of this discussion.
November 1984, she is very lonely. She gets very down and often says she wants to die rather than carry on, as she can't see any good in the future for herself. And you are only 12 years old.
I just didn't have any memory of actually saying that I had wanted to die. And a frightening thing for me would be if that was possible.
Yeah.
Because if you took those who love me away, or you took my career away from me, you took my care package away from me.
Yeah, life would be very different.
It would be very different. But would you go with me to Switzerland, to Dignitas, if I had wanted that?
I would never have agreed to that.
Wouldn't you?
No way.
No, but Mum, you've supported everything else.
Yeah, but
not to compare.
I'm not going to lose you.
This was something I raised with Esther earlier because I knew she was going to watch the documentary, which she did, and so she reacted to that in what was a very wide-ranging conversation about her effectively facing her own mortality. Well, Esther, first of all, how are you doing? I know it's your 84th birthday on June the 22nd. You've given an interview saying you're looking forward to that. You planted tulips last year that you didn't think you'd necessarily see in bloom.
All true. And I'm on this one of these fascinating new drugs. I call it my miracle drug. And so far, it seems to be holding it at bay. No, but I said to my consultant, when am I going to die? And he said, sometime in the next 10 years. So
Wow.
Maybe I'll make, my mother made 94, so maybe I will. Who knows?
When you ask the consultant that, how do you feel about that question yourself? I mean, presumably you do, and you have been thinking because of the assisted dying debate, your own death. Has that been difficult to think about?
Well, when you're diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, whether or not there's a public debate about assisted dying, you automatically think about the fact that you are mortal. It wasn't news to me because I knew I was going to drop off my perch sometime fairly soon. I mean, when you're in your 80s, we all know that.
Yes.
The debate about assisted dying has really amazed me because I mentioned that I joined Dignitas and I had no idea it was going to resonate with so many people. But in the recent parliamentary debate in the Westminster Hall, one of the speakers talked about the fact that since Harold Shipman's murders,
Yes.
the regulations involving doctors have tightened up.
Yes.
So that it's much harder for them quietly to bump you off in the way, they did in the older days. So I think more people have seen people they love die in pain in a way that they would really not wish to, and asking for help to die and not being given it. And I think that has persuaded a lot of people that the law is a mess at the moment and needs clearing up.
I saw that YouGov polling suggests that 73% of the British public, so 3/4 nearly, think that doctors should assist in cases of terminal illness, Esther. I mean, is that the distinction to be drawn here, that the case must be terminal, that somebody must have been told, look, you've only got months to live, in order for this even to be a consideration?
Well, that's the proposal at the moment. And some people are putting a timescale on it, like 6 months to live. We're in a quite good position here because other countries all over the place, Netherlands, Australia, all over the place, many of the American states, etc., have legalized it in different ways. So we can look at the evidence from those countries and see what works. Canada, and the one thing I can tell you about those countries is not one of them would go back to criminalizing assisted dying.
Yes.
They all vary in the kinds of regulations they put in, the precautions they put in, and obviously there must be very careful precautions to protect vulnerable people from, being pressured into taking their lives or other circumstances which are quite wrong and should not be allowed. But if someone asks for help to die, it's a sort of choice that we're giving people these days over marriage, over birth, all kinds of things. So it's the final choice, I think.
But then there are concerns about mission creep. Did you watch Liz Carr's documentary on BBC One last night, Better Off Dead? Liz Carr is the actress from well, she's best known for Silent Witness, but she's also a disability campaigner. She makes the point that she was in a wheelchair from 14, and she looks back in that documentary at a letter she wrote to her mother saying she wished she could die at the time that she was diagnosed. But as she points out, she's gone on to live a very happy life.
Yes, and I know that a lot of disabled people are very concerned that they'll be pressured. And I think what that reflects is society's attitude to disability, because they clearly feel vulnerable, and that people are telling them that they would be better off dead and so on. But I mean, suppose you're a disabled person who is terminally ill, in great pain. Shouldn't you be allowed to ask for help to die? Shouldn't we all be asked? If, given the choice. I can understand how they feel, and I think there were probably exactly the same doubts about when the law relating to terminating pregnancy were relaxed and people were given more choice.
Yes.
But the fact is that nobody is suggesting anything other than someone requesting for help being given the choice. Nobody is suggesting that the choice be imposed on anyone.
No.
That's all we're asking for.
Although there was another example in the Liz Carr documentary of a woman in Canada. She had been involved in a car accident. She became extremely depressed because of her circumstances, even though she had the hope of a recovery. And she decided that she would take her own life and didn't tell her family about it. And of course, it's left her daughter distraught because she felt that her mother would have had a chance at a life of quality had she been given more medical and indeed psychological help. There's that concern, Esther, isn't there, that due to a lack of services, this may be an option if there is this mission creep that people take if they've got mental health problems, perhaps if they haven't got enough money, perhaps if they feel lonely.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could go on perhapsing for a long time here. I mean, the fact is that in this country, we're not considering mental health pain as one of the conditions where someone can ask for help to die. I know that mental health can create just as much suffering as physical health if you're ill. So, but we're not considering that. And indeed, Canada has delayed bringing in the provision that would enable those with mental health suffering to ask for assisted death. You can only do it with physical suffering, and that's a choice for the parliamentarians to make. But I think the other argument that's sometimes put forward is that treating mental health issues is improving, and that one day soon there will be effective treatment for depression, which sometimes at the moment is a terminal illness because it does cause people to take their own lives, sometimes under very difficult circumstances, like this lady in Canada.
Yes.
How much better, surely, to have an assisted death with all your family around you, everybody agreeing that it's the right thing for you.
I mean, under what circumstances could you see yourself taking up that place at Dignitas?
Oh, well, I mean, if a scan showed that, the miracle drug was no longer a miracle, at the moment, one of the conditions is for legalizing it is 6 months. So I'd have to say to my oncologist, that 10-year thing you said, could you tell me now where we are on this road? Look, we're all dying, Camilla, aren't we? We're all dying.
Yes.
When I say to any of my medical friends and relatives, am I dying? They always say, we all are. So it's only a question of trying to have a good death, however you define it.
Incredibly powerful there from Esther Rantzen. You sat down with her for a lengthy period. We'll be doing more of that interview with her about her life and the decisions she is making on a future episode of the Daily Tea. So please look out for that. But Camilla, she raised so many complicated issues in such a sort of gentle way. I was so impressed with the way she discussed this very emotional subject. Camilla, what's your feelings what feelings does this spark in you, this idea of a sister dying?
When I went into the interview, I felt like I was opposed to assisted dying, and I've written a column saying that because I am worried about what I described there as mission creep, this idea that you could have disabled people, people with mental illnesses, people who just feel lonely, wanting to end their own life. So that caveat of it just applying to the terminally ill, I think does appeal. I can completely see where Esther's coming from. She wants to have control of her own death, and she wants to make sure that her death is a good one and not a bad one. I've witnessed somebody, my own mother, when she died in 2001, the months leading up to that were horrendous, and she did not have a quality of life. I've written about this before. Kamal, she was an alcoholic, and by that point she had drank so much that she wasn't herself. And what happens if you're a chronic alcoholic and your liver stops functioning, the toxins go to your brain and you basically do go slightly mad. And so the mother that I was confronted with in a hospital bed was not the mother who brought me up. By the way, that was a woman who had always said to me in life, if I'm ever not compos mentis, put me out of my misery. When you're faced with that practically, as the child of somebody in that situation, I mean, what was I going to do? If I was to honour my mother's wishes, I would have smothered her with a pillow. That's not going to happen. I then got into a situation where I'm looking at adult care for her. I'm going around these institutions thinking this is the last thing on earth that she would want. I don't think she would have been able at the time to have consented to Dignitas. And also, I've written about this. I had an extremely moving final conversation with my mother, which was so strange because she had not been lucid at all for most of the time she was in hospital. I went to see her. I went to see her to tell her that I was going on a date with my now husband, who she remembered because he went to school with my older brothers. And I said, I'm going on a date with Dominic. And absolutely out of nothing, she suddenly started making sense and said, oh, he was a lovely boy. I hope you have a good time. And I said, well, I'll come back, Mum, and I'll tell you all about it. Actually, I saw Dominic for the date on the Friday and she died on the Sunday. This is in 2001. I was in my early 20s. And I treasure that moment because it was the last lucid conversation I had with Mum. And it's a cherished memory because everything that preceded that was not the kind of conversation you'd want to remember a parent by. And I think to myself, well, if I'd taken Mum's advice, I wouldn't have had that last memory. But I appreciate I'm probably pretty unique in having had that experience. And to be fair, she wasn't writhing around in agony, but she had no quality of life at the end.
So many of us have got those stories, haven't we, which connects with this subject. And that is the great difficulty for making policy on it. The individual, for you and your mother, for Esther Rantzen, the specifics of the individual seem to make it obvious around the notions of assisted dying, but the issue about the overall effect that allowing for assisted dying could have, I think, becomes very, very difficult. For me, when my father died when I was I was 40, and he had a form of multiple sclerosis, and he was in a care home for many years, and towards the end did not have a good quality of life. But palliative care did actually enable the pain to be managed, although very similar with your mother, you lost the person. And he was, for the last 6 months, intellectually incapable. I don't think I would have been able to make a decision similar to what you've said about your mother. I would have been able to make a decision on ending my father's life, and I wouldn't have wanted that responsibility. And in a way, whatever he had said to me about what he wanted. The difficulty is then taking away the individual and those stories that you've said, Camilla, that Esther has outlined, that so many of us have from the policy discussion. Because just like you, I've listened to Esther and she is incredibly powerful in the way she speaks. And I've always been, like you, slightly negative about the whole idea of assisted dying. But I still do worry, and if you look at some of the evidence from around the world, that once you cross the line into assisted dying, it can have a mass effect, even though the individual care is incredibly positive. The mass effects can be negative, and Canada has seen, which has some of, or I think the most liberal assisted dying laws in the world, has seen a huge increase in the number of people who go through assisted dying, and some evidence that people have gone beyond the debate. As Esther said in her interview, they are still discussing whether you can go beyond terminal illness as a reason for assisted dying, but that some people who wanted assisted deaths said that it's because they were a burden on their family. So as soon as you start
That's
as soon as you cross that line, there is evidence that the data then starts growing.